The judge froze when he saw me in court. No one knew who I really was until then. When I walked into the courtroom that morning, my daughter, Dawn, rolled her eyes and whispered something dismissive to her husband, Dave. But then something extraordinary happened. The judge looked up, froze completely, and murmured in disbelief, "It's her." The entire courtroom fell silent. None of them had any idea who I really was. Not until that moment. That trial changed everything. My name is Maeve. I'm 69 years old, and until a few months ago, I was just an ordinary grandma. Every morning, I woke up at 6, brewed my coffee in the same chipped mug I'd used for over 20 years, and looked out the kitchen window as I watered the African violets my late husband had loved so much. It was a simple, predictable life, full of small rituals that gave me peace. For 45 years, I was the mother who sacrificed everything for my only daughter, Dawn. I worked nights cleaning offices, sold cupcakes on weekends, and sewed clothes to make a few extra dollars. Everything I did, every hour I lost, was for her, so she could go to college and have the life I never had. When she married Dave, an arrogant man who never had a kind word for me, I swallowed my pride and welcomed them into my home every Sunday, setting the table and wearing my best smile. After my husband passed away, I thought Dawn and I would grow closer again. How naive I was. Instead of finding comfort in our shared grief, she began to see me as a burden. Her visits became short and obligatory, her phone calls infrequent, her excuses more creative each time. The greatest humiliation of my life came on a gray Thursday in October. I had spent hours preparing chicken and dumplings, her favorite as a child, the kind that used to make her smile no matter how bad her day had been. I even laid out my best embroidered tablecloth, the one I'd made when she was a teenager, and placed fresh flowers at the center. When they arrived, Dave walked in like he owned the place. Without saying hello, he slumped into my late husband's armchair and turned on the TV. Dawn wore a green dress I had bought for her myself, but her expression was cold as January ice. "Mom, we need to talk," she said in that clipped tone she'd adopted since marrying Dave. It was a voice that belonged to a stranger. She sat on the edge of the chair as if she couldn't wait to leave. "Dave and I have made a decision," she began, while he stayed on the sofa, eyes fixed on the screen. "This house is too big for you. You can't maintain it alone anymore. And we need a bigger place for when we have kids. We found the perfect retirement community for people your age." I felt as though the floor had opened beneath me. This was the house where Dawn had taken her first steps, where we'd celebrated every birthday, where her father had died holding my hand. Every corner carried our history. Every photograph told our story. "But Dawn, this is our home. All our memories are here," I pleaded, my voice trembling, breaking with every word. "Memories are in the heart, Mom, not on the walls," she replied coldly. "Besides, the community has activities for people like you. You'll be better off there. You'll have company your own age." Dave smiled with satisfaction, his eyes already scanning the rooms like a man taking inventory. "It's for the best, Mrs. Maeve," he said with that fake politeness I'd always despised. "We'll handle all the paperwork. Don't you worry about a thing." My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. My own daughter, the child for whom I'd sacrificed my youth, my health, my dreams, was throwing me out of my home to hand it to that despicable man. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. "I need time to think," I murmured, clinging to what little dignity I had left. "There's not much to think about, Mom," Dawn said, standing up. "It's already decided. The appraiser's coming next week." And with that, they left, leaving my chicken and dumplings untouched, my flowers wilting, and my heart broken on the table where we had once been a happy family. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen staring at the photographs on the wall. Dawn as a baby, Dawn on her first day of school, Dawn at her graduation. In every single one, I was there beside her, holding her, smiling with pride. How had it come to this? How had the little girl who once told me I was her hero become this cold stranger? The following days were a nightmare. Dave brought an appraiser without warning, a man in a gray suit who walked through my house as if it were already sold. He took notes, measured rooms, and commented on renovations that would add value, as if I wasn't even standing there. Dawn followed him, nodding at his every word. "The pipes are old," he said, "and these kitchen tiles are dated." Those tiles, my husband had laid them with his own hands when Dawn was 10. Each one was a piece of our love and hard work, but to them it was just outdated. The humiliation deepened when Dawn showed up the next day with brochures. "Look, Mom, it has beautiful gardens and bingo nights on Tuesdays," she said in that false, cheerful tone that made me sick. "Plus there's a nurse on duty 24/7. You'll be safer there." Safer. I had lived in that house for 30 years without a single accident. I knew every creaky floorboard, every sound. My neighbors looked out for me. My plants thrived in that light. But to Dawn, none of that mattered. All that mattered was that I get out of her way. Then came the day I least expected. They arrived with papers. Dave walked in first, as if he owned the place, followed by Dawn and a man in a suit who introduced himself as a lawyer. "Mrs. Maeve, we have all the documents ready for the transfer of property," he said. "We just need your signature." "Transfer?" I asked, confused. "I thought you were going to sell the house." Dawn avoided my eyes. "Well, Dave and I decided to keep it. It's better for the family to hold on to property." That's when I understood everything. It wasn't about concern or care. They weren't trying to help me. They were trying to steal from me. My home, my life's work, my legacy. "I'm not signing anything," I said, summoning every ounce of strength left in me. Dave's mask slipped instantly. "Ma'am, you're no longer in a position to make decisions. Dawn is your only heir. She's acting in your best interest." "This is my house," I shouted, surprising even myself, "and I'm not leaving." "Mom, don't make this harder," Dawn said softly, as if she pitied me. "You know you can't live alone. You even forgot to turn off the gas stove last week." That was a lie, but Dave smiled, seizing it. "See, Dawn? This is exactly what I was talking about. It's dangerous." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Ma'am, if you don't sign voluntarily, we might have to pursue legal measures, perhaps a mental incapacity proceeding." My blood turned to ice. My own daughter was willing to have me declared incompetent, to steal my home. The man I had once accepted as a son-in-law was threatening me in my own living room, and I, a 69-year-old widow, was completely alone. "I need time," I whispered. "You have 1 week," Dave said coldly. "Then we'll do what we have to do." When they left, I collapsed into my husband's armchair and cried harder than I had since his funeral. I cried for the daughter I'd lost, for the home they were taking, for the life that was crumbling around me. That night, for the first time in my life, I considered giving up. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was too old, too weak, too useless to fight. Maybe it would be easier to fade quietly into the background, but then something deep inside me, a flicker of dignity, refused to die. No. I wasn't going to let them destroy everything I'd built, not after a lifetime of sacrifice. The next day, Dawn came back alone. For a moment, my heart leapt. Maybe she'd come to apologize. Maybe she'd changed her mind, how wrong I was. "Mom, I came to help you pack," she said in that robotic voice of hers. "I brought boxes. We can start with your clothes." I searched her face for any sign of the girl I'd raised, but she was gone. "Dawn, please," I begged. "Reconsider. I'm your mother." "That's exactly why I'm doing this," she said without meeting my eyes. "Because I love you and I want what's best for you." Love? Was this love? Taking my home, my dignity, everything I had left? For hours she packed my things like they were junk. She shoved family photos into boxes, wrapped my husband's books without care, stacked my wedding china like it meant nothing. "This dress is so old, Mom," she said, holding up the one I'd worn to my husband's funeral. "Leave it," I whispered. "Please." But she dropped it into a donation bag anyway. Then she found my jewelry box, my wedding ring, the earrings my husband gave me on our 20th anniversary, the gold chain that belonged to my mother. "This will be safer in a deposit box," Dawn said, slipping it into her purse. "Things get lost easily in those communities." "Those are mine," I shouted, trying to grab it. "Mom, you're getting upset," she said calmly, too calmly. "You see why we worry?" And in that moment, I realized I had lost her completely. That night, she left, taking my jewelry, my memories, my peace. I sat alone in a half-empty house surrounded by boxes and ghosts. Every bare wall screamed of what I'd lost. The next few days were a blur. Dave came every morning to supervise, ordering strangers to measure and photograph my home as if I were invisible. "The lady needs to hurry up," I heard him tell Dawn. "The movers come Monday." It was Friday. I had 3 days left in the only home I'd ever known. "What if I don't finish packing?" I asked softly. "Don't worry, Mom," Dawn said without looking up from her phone. "The movers will take care of it. Just take what's essential." What's essential? As if 30 years of love could be reduced to a suitcase. That afternoon, after they left, I wandered through my home like a ghost. I touched the walls my husband had painted, sat in every chair where we'd once eaten breakfast, opened every drawer filled with fragments of our past. In his old desk, I found letters, bills, and one folder I'd never seen before. A folder marked with my husband's initials and locked with a tiny clasp. I searched for the key, desperate for something, anything that would connect me to him again. I finally found it tucked inside an old book, marking a page about investments and property. When I opened that folder, my world changed forever. There were documents I didn't fully understand, but one caught my attention immediately. A will dated just 6 months before my husband's death, one I had never seen before. My hands trembled as I read. My husband had been far more perceptive than I ever imagined. And Dawn, my dear Dawn, had no idea what she was about to discover. With shaking hands, I began to read the will that would change my life forever. My husband, who had always been so reserved about money, had been much busier than I ever realized during his final years. The document revealed that he hadn't just been the modest employee I believed him to be. For decades, he had quietly invested every extra dime he earned, buying small properties when prices were low, investing in company stocks that were now worth a fortune, and building a wealth I never could have imagined in my wildest dreams. But that wasn't all. The will clearly stated that I was the sole heir to everything. Dawn would receive only a small sum if I died, and only if she had cared for me with love and respect during my final years. My husband had been wiser than I thought. He had seen something in Dave that I had refused to see. Then I came across a clause that took my breath away. My husband owned the entire building where Dawn and Dave lived. The apartment they believed they were paying rent for every month was actually ours. All the tenants in that building had been paying rent directly to us, and that money had been automatically deposited into an account I never knew existed. With trembling fingers, I searched through the papers until I found the bank statements. The amount was astronomical. For 2 years since my husband's death, I had been living as a poor widow, while a fortune was quietly accumulating in the bank. And there was more. My husband owned shares in the company where Dave worked. Not minor shares, but a significant stake, large enough to influence company decisions. He also had investments in restaurants, small businesses, and even a large piece of land on the outskirts of the city that was now worth millions. I read and reread every document, every contract, every certificate. Everything was there, perfectly organized and legal. My husband had built a silent empire, and I was its empress without even knowing it. But what struck me most was a personal letter at the end of the folder, written in my husband's own hand and addressed to me. "My dearest Maeve," it began, "if you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you, and you have found this treasure I kept for you. Forgive me for not telling you while I was alive. I wanted it to be a surprise for your golden years. You always worked so hard. You sacrificed so much for Dawn and me that I wanted to make sure you'd never want for anything." Tears rolled down my cheeks as I continued reading. I must also confess something. I never completely trusted Dave. There's something about him I don't like, an ambition that worries me. That's why I structured everything this way. If Dawn takes care of you and treats you with love and respect, she'll have a comfortable life. But if she ever mistreats you or tries to take advantage of you, you'll have all the power to protect yourself. My husband had foreseen everything that was happening. He had seen right through Dave from the beginning and had prepared my defense long before he died. "Use this power wisely, my love," he wrote. "Not to hurt, but to protect yourself and to teach. Deep down, Dawn is a good person. She's just confused. But if you need to defend yourself, you now have the tools to do it. Signed, your husband, who loves you for all eternity." I sat on the floor of my living room, surrounded by documents worth millions, crying for the wise man I had lost, and for the daughter I was about to lose. But for the first time in months, my tears weren't of defeat. They were tears of gratitude, of hope, and yes, of quiet satisfaction. Dawn and Dave thought they were stripping me of everything. They had no idea I owned the building they lived in, the shares in the company where he worked, and properties all over the city. They thought they were throwing me out of my home to take it for themselves, not realizing that this house was the least valuable thing I owned. That night, I didn't sleep. Not from sadness this time, but because my mind was alive with plans. My husband had given me more than money. He had given me power, and now I had to decide how to use it. Monday morning came with a light rain tapping against the windows. Dawn and Dave arrived early with movers, expecting to find me packed and ready to leave. Instead, they found me calmly sitting in my favorite armchair, sipping tea as if it were any other day. "Mom, what are you doing? The movers are already here," Dawn said impatiently. "I'm not leaving anymore," I replied, my voice steady, even to my own surprise. Dave stepped closer, flashing that threatening smile I knew too well. "Mrs. Maeve, we already talked about this. You don't have a choice." I looked him straight in the eyes for the first time in years. "You're right, Dave. I don't have a choice, but it turns out neither do you." Something in my tone made them both pause. Dawn stepped forward, worry on her face. "What are you talking about, Mom?" "I'm talking about the fact that I just discovered something very interesting about my financial situation," I said, taking another sip of tea. "But don't worry, you'll understand everything soon." They exchanged that familiar look, the one they used when they thought I was losing my mind. But I wasn't the same frightened woman from last week. I had a plan, and more importantly, I had the means to carry it out. "Mom, enough with the games," Dawn snapped. "The movers are waiting. They have other jobs after this." "Then they can leave," I said calmly, "because they're not moving a single thing from this house." Dave stood up abruptly. "Ma'am, I don't think you understand the situation. You no longer have a choice." "On the contrary, Dave," I replied, rising from my chair. "It's you who doesn't understand." I walked to my desk and picked up a few of the documents I'd found. Not all, just the ones I needed. "Did you know," I asked, "that your apartment, the one you've lived in for 3 years, has never been paid to its real owner?" Dawn frowned. "What are you talking about? We pay every month." "Yes," I said, smiling, "but you pay a property management company that deposits that money to me, because I own the entire building." The silence that followed was deafening. Dave let out a nervous laugh. "That's impossible. You live on a measly pension." "I lived on a pension because I chose to," I said, savoring every second of their confusion. My husband was much smarter than any of us imagined. I handed them one of the property deeds. Dawn took it with trembling hands, reading it once, twice, 3 times. This can't be real," she whispered. "It's as real as the fact that you were throwing me out of my own house," I said. "But as it turns out, this house is the least valuable thing I own." Dave snatched the document, his face turning pale as he read. "This has to be fake, a forgery." "You're welcome to verify it," I said with a smile I hadn't worn in months. "In fact, I encourage you to." Dawn collapsed onto the sofa. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" "Because I didn't know until 3 days ago," I said softly. "Your father kept this secret to protect me. What a visionary he was." Dave began pacing. "This changes everything, Dawn. If your mother really owns the building, she could evict us any time. Along with all the other tenants who've been paying me for the last 2 years, I finished for him. "You can't do that," Dawn said, her voice cracking. "We're family." "Family," I repeated, bitterness creeping into my tone. "Like when you planned to declare me mentally incompetent to steal my house, when you packed my memories like garbage, when you took my mother's jewelry." Dawn began to cry. Not the manipulative tears she'd used before, but real ones. "Mom, please, we can fix this. It was all Dave's idea." "Dawn!" Dave shouted. "It's true," she insisted. "He convinced me it was best for you. He said you were losing your memory, that you couldn't take care of yourself." "And you believed him?" I asked, my heart breaking again. "Do you know your mother so little that you trusted him over your own instincts?" The movers, who had been lingering by the door, stepped forward awkwardly. "Excuse me, are we moving the stuff or not? We've got another job in an hour." "No," I said firmly. "Nothing is being moved here. You can go." Dave stepped closer, his aggression surfacing. "This isn't over, old lady. We'll challenge those documents, prove they're fake." "Go ahead," I said coolly. "But in the meantime, I hope you have enough saved up to find somewhere else to live, because on the 1st of next month, you'll be receiving an eviction notice." "You can't do this to us," Dave yelled, losing control. "I can, and I will," I replied. "But don't worry. I'll give you the 30 days the law allows." Dawn stood abruptly. "Mom, please, you have to understand. Dave said if I didn't convince you to move, he'd leave me. He said he couldn't bear you being alone, that you were a danger to yourself." "And that justifies what you did?" I asked quietly. "Treating me like trash? Packing my memories? Stealing your grandmother's jewelry?" "I'll give it back," Dawn said desperately, rummaging through her purse. "It's too late for that," I said. Then Dave spoke again, this time not with anger, but with calculated calm. "Mrs. Maeve, we can make a deal. Dawn is pregnant. Are you really going to throw your grandchild out on the street?" It felt like a punch to the stomach. Dawn was pregnant, and she hadn't told me. I was going to be a grandmother, and I found out as part of a blackmail attempt. "Is that true?" I asked. She nodded through tears. "I wanted to tell you differently. I wanted it to be a surprise." "Like the surprise of throwing me out of my house?" I asked, though my resolve began to falter. Then I remembered my husband's words. Not to hurt, but to protect and to teach. Dawn needed to learn, and her child deserved better values than Dave's. The news disarmed me for a moment, but I couldn't forget the pain they'd caused, the humiliation, the contempt, the months of suffering. "Congratulations on the baby, Dawn," I said evenly. "But that doesn't erase what you did." "Mom, please," she begged. "Think about your grandchild. Do you really want them to grow up without their grandmother?" "Their grandmother was always here," I said. "You're the ones who decided to get rid of her." Dave tried one last manipulation. "If you really have all this money, why not help us instead of punishing us? We could be a united family." "A united family?" I laughed bitterly. Like when you tried to have me declared incompetent? When you turned my daughter against me? I never— Quiet, Dave, I interrupted sharply. I've heard enough of your lies. The movers had gone, leaving only the three of us. Dawn crying softly, Dave pacing like a caged animal, and me standing tall, calm for the first time in months. Here's what's going to happen, I said firmly. You have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. Until then, don't come here unless it's a real emergency. And after that, Dawn asked weakly. After that, I said, we'll see if you've learned anything about respect and about family. Dave exploded. This is emotional blackmail. You're using your money to manipulate us. Manipulation? I echoed with a bitter laugh. Like when you used my supposed mental incompetence to manipulate me? Like when you used my mother's love to blackmail me, I said. It's different, Dave murmured, but even he didn't sound convinced anymore. You're right, I admitted. It is different, because this time I actually have the power I'm using. Dawn rose slowly from the sofa. Is there anything we can do to make you change your mind? Yes, I replied without hesitation, but I don't think Dave will be willing to do it. What is it? She asked, clinging to that last sliver of hope. I want an apology, a real, sincere apology, for every humiliation you put me through. I want you to admit that you treated me like trash, and I want Dave to admit that this was all his idea. Dave's face turned crimson with rage. I'm never going to humiliate myself in front of you. Then get ready to move, I said simply. Dawn looked at him pleadingly. Dave, please, she's my mother, your mother-in-law. We can swallow our pride for our child. No, he yelled. I'm not going to bow down to this manipulative old woman. The insult hung in the air like a slap. Dawn's mouth fell open, finally seeing her husband without the filter of blind love. Manipulative old woman, I repeated softly. Interesting. That's what you really think of me, Dave. No, Dawn murmured quickly, but he had already lost control. Yes, that's exactly what I think, Dave snapped. You're a bitter old lady who can't stand to see her daughter happy. That's why you made up this whole story about the money. Made up, I said quietly, walking to my desk. I pulled out a stack of documents. Did I also make up these bank statements, these property deeds, these stock certificates? I placed each document on the dining room table, one by one, until the surface was covered with irrefutable proof of my fortune. Dawn stepped closer, examining the papers with trembling hands. Oh my God, Mom, this is real. It's all real. Very real, I confirmed. And now you understand why your husband is so desperate to discredit me. Dave tried one last move. Dawn, you can't believe your mother hid all this for years. She's lying. No, Dawn suddenly yelled, surprising us all. Stop it, Dave. Just stop. She turned to me, tears streaming down her cheeks. Mom, forgive me. Please forgive me for everything. You're right. I treated you like trash. I took your memories, your jewelry, your dignity. And the worst part is, I did it because he convinced me you were a burden. Dawn, don't listen to her, Dave barked, but she ignored him completely. He filled my head with lies, she continued, voice trembling. Lies about your mental health, about how dangerous it was for you to live alone. He made me feel guilty for leaving you here, when all you wanted was to stay in your home. Dawn, be quiet, Dave ordered, but it was too late. Don't you ever tell me to be quiet again, she shouted. I'm sick of your manipulations, sick of you using me to hurt my mother. The silence that followed was absolute. For the first time in years, Dawn had stood up for something real, something right, instead of blindly obeying her husband. Dave looked at her, his voice cold and sharp. If you choose your mother over me, Dawn, this relationship is over. Dawn stood motionless for a moment, processing the ultimatum. Then, to my surprise, she straightened her back and looked him straight in the eyes. Then it's over, she said, her voice firm and unfamiliar. Dave froze, as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. For years, he had controlled her every decision, every thought, every move, and now she had told him no. "You're not serious," he stammered with a nervous smile. "You're pregnant, Dawn. You can't raise a child alone." "I won't be alone," Dawn replied, looking at me for the first time in months with something that resembled love. "I have my mother." But I wasn't ready to forgive her so easily. The months of humiliation, the nights of crying, the feeling of losing my only daughter, those wounds didn't just vanish with a few words. "Dawn," I said softly, "I appreciate that you've finally opened your eyes, but this doesn't erase what happened." Her face fell. "Mom, please. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'll do whatever it takes." Dave, realizing he was losing control, suddenly dropped to his knees before me, his expression dripping with false remorse. "Mrs. Maeve, you're right," he said. "It was all my fault. I convinced Dawn you couldn't take care of yourself. I pressured her into making hard decisions. Please forgive me." I looked down at him, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and disgust. It was pathetic to see him grovel after months of arrogance. "You're asking for forgiveness now, Dave, because you've realized I'm not the poor, helpless old woman you thought I was?" "I was wrong," he continued, pretending to repent. "Let me make it up to you. We can be a happy family." "A happy family?" I echoed. "Like when you threatened to have me declared mentally incompetent? That was a mistake. Or when you called me a manipulative old woman 5 minutes ago?" Dave swallowed hard, realizing every word he'd spoken was now evidence against him. "I was upset," he stammered. "I didn't know what I was saying." "No," I said firmly. "You knew exactly what you were saying. You were just showing your true face." I turned to Dawn, who stood watching with shame and pain in her eyes. "And you, Dawn, for months you treated me like a nuisance. Do you think an apology erases all that?" "No," she admitted, her voice cracking. "I know I can't erase what I did, but I can try to make things right." "How?" I asked. She looked at Dave, still kneeling on the floor, then back at me. "By leaving him," she said finally. "By leaving the man who convinced me to betray the only person who ever loved me unconditionally." Dave jumped up, furious. "You can't be serious. You're having my child." "I am having my child," Dawn replied with quiet determination. "A child I don't want growing up watching his father manipulate and mistreat his grandmother." "Dawn, you're making the biggest mistake of your life," Dave threatened. "The biggest mistake of my life was marrying you," she shot back. Dave glared at us, his face twisted with hatred. "This isn't over. I'll fight for custody of my child. I'll prove you're both insane." "And with what money will you fight?" I asked calmly. "Tomorrow morning I'll be speaking to your boss. Did you know I own enough shares in your company to influence personnel decisions?" Dave's face went pale. "You wouldn't dare. After everything you've done to me? Of course I would." "That's abuse of power," he muttered. "Like when you abused my love for Dawn, or when you abused her trust to turn her against me." Dave stormed toward the door, but stopped before leaving. "This isn't over," he spat. "I'll destroy both of you." "Go ahead and try," I said evenly, "but do it from somewhere else, because you have exactly 1 hour to get your things out of my building." "1 hour? You said we had 30 days. That was when Dawn was with you. Now that she's on her own, there's no reason for you to stay on my property." Dave slammed the door so hard the whole house shook. For the first time in months, Dawn and I were alone. The silence was heavy, broken only by the rustle of documents that still lay scattered on the table, proof of a truth that had changed everything. "Mom," Dawn whispered after a long moment, "can you ever forgive me?" I looked at her. My 30-year-old daughter, who had lived a lie, betrayed me for a worthless man, and now stood before me pregnant and alone. "I don't know, Dawn," I said honestly. "You hurt me deeply." "I know," she murmured. and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you." "Starting with what?" I asked. "Starting with giving you back your mother's jewelry," she said, pulling out the small bag she'd taken days earlier. "And by asking if I can stay here tonight. I have nowhere else to go." I looked at the bag, then at my daughter. My heart softened just a little. "One night," I said finally, "but tomorrow we start talking about how you're going to earn my trust back." Dawn nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Thank you, Mom. I promise I'll make things right." But I knew promises were easy. The real test would come in the days that followed. Those days were strange and tense. Dawn stayed in her old room, the one I'd kept just the way it was since she got married. During the day, we moved through the house like polite strangers, speaking only when necessary, about breakfast, the weather, her morning sickness. But I was watching every gesture, every word, every effort she made to earn back my trust. And what I saw gave me hope. For the first time in years, my daughter was doing things for herself. She washed her dishes, kept her room spotless, and even helped with chores without being asked. On the third day, as I watered my violets by the window, Dawn approached with a cup of tea in her hands. "Mom, can we talk?" I nodded without turning to look at her. I had learned that silence spoke louder than words. "I've been thinking a lot these past few days," she began, sitting in the chair where Dave used to sit like a king, "about everything that happened, about the things I did and said. I kept watering my plants, waiting. I've realized it wasn't just Dave who changed me," she continued. "I allowed him to. I chose to believe him instead of trusting my own heart." I finally turned to look at her. Her eyes were tired, her face pale. She looked thinner despite the pregnancy. "And why do you think that happened?" I asked. She sighed. "Because it was easier to blame you than to face the fact that I married the wrong man." That honesty caught me off guard. I'd expected excuses, not truth. "When Dave started complaining that you visited too much," she said, "I knew he was being unfair, but it was easier to think you were clingy than to admit he was selfish." She placed her hands on her belly. "When he suggested you move to a retirement community, I knew it was wrong, but I wanted to believe him, because it meant I didn't have to face the real problem." "What was the real problem?" I asked, though I already knew. "That I married a man who didn't respect my family, who didn't respect me, and who was never going to change." In the days that followed, Dawn told me things that chilled me to the bone. How Dave had isolated her from her friends, controlled every cent she spent, convinced her to quit her job because real wives stay home. "And you never thought to tell me?" I asked one afternoon. "Dave said you wouldn't understand," she replied softly. "He told me you were from another generation. He said if I talked to you, you'd tell me to leave him, and he didn't want any outside interference." Each revelation cut deep. My daughter had been suffering in silence while I believed she was happy, and by the time she'd tried to come back to me, he'd already turned her against me completely. 2 weeks after Dave left, Dawn got a phone call that drained all the color from her face. "It's the building manager," she said shakily. "Dave's in the lobby. He says he has the right to come up because he's still my husband." "And what did you tell him?" "That I didn't want to see him, but he won't leave. He's shouting that he'll call the police, that this is kidnapping." I rose from my chair with a calmness that surprised even me. "Tell the manager to come down. I'll handle him." "Mom, he's furious. We don't know what he's capable of." "Exactly," I said. "That's why I have to go down there." When I reached the lobby, I found Dave in a rage, yelling at the poor manager who was trembling behind the desk. "That crazy old lady has my wife kidnapped," he shouted. "Call the police." "Good afternoon, Dave," I said evenly. He turned toward me, eyes bloodshot. He'd clearly been drinking. "You give me back my wife right now." "Dawn is exactly where she wants to be," I replied calmly. "And if you don't leave my property immediately, I'll be the one calling the police." "This isn't your property," he barked. "You're a liar." I pulled out my phone, dialed my lawyer, and put her on speaker. "Attorney Victoria," I said as she answered. "It's Maeve." "I have an upset man here who refuses to leave my building," I said into the phone, trying to keep my voice steady. "Could you confirm that I am the legal owner?" "Of course, Mrs. Maeve," my lawyer replied clearly. "You're the sole owner of the building located at—" Dave went silent as he listened to the legal confirmation. The manager shifted uncomfortably beside him, his expression a mixture of fear and embarrassment, finally realizing the truth. "Anything else you need me to clarify, Dave?" I asked once I'd hung up. "This isn't over," he muttered, though his voice had lost its edge. "You're right," I replied calmly, "because tomorrow I'll be talking to your supervisor, and the day after to the bank that gave you the loan for your car. Contacts are useful, especially when you have enough money." He didn't answer. He just turned and left. But I knew he'd be back. Men like him rarely give up easily. 2 months later, the day of the trial arrived, like a storm we'd seen brewing for too long. Dave had made good on his threats. He was suing us for parental alienation and financial manipulation, demanding full custody of the baby Dawn was carrying. That morning, as I slipped into my best black suit, Dawn appeared in my doorway, tears welling in her eyes. "Mom, I'm scared," she whispered. "What if the judge believes him? What if he takes my baby away?" I pulled her close, something I hadn't done in months, and felt her trembling against me. "That's not going to happen," I assured her softly. "We have the truth on our side." At the courthouse, Dave was already waiting, standing beside a lawyer who clearly cost more than he could afford. He shot me a look filled with that familiar hatred, but it didn't scare me anymore. I had something he'd never have, the peace of mind that comes from knowing you're in the right. Dawn and I sat together on our bench. She wore a purple dress that gently framed her 5-month pregnancy. I wore the pearl earrings my late husband had given me on our anniversary. We were ready. Dave's lawyer went first, painting me as a vengeful woman who'd used her wealth to destroy a happy marriage. He spoke of manipulation, emotional blackmail, and a toxic mother-in-law who couldn't accept her daughter's independence. But when it was our turn, my lawyer, Victoria, stood with quiet confidence and began to present the evidence. Text messages full of Dave's insults, recordings of his threats, and testimony from neighbors who had heard his shouting and abuse. Then came the moment that changed everything. The judge looked up from his papers and stared at me. "Mrs. Maeve Williams?" he asked, disbelief in his tone. "Yes, Your Honor," I answered, confused. He removed his glasses, studying me more closely. "Did you work at family court about 30 years ago?" My heart stopped. "Yes, Your Honor. I was a secretary for Judge Miller." A small smile tugged at his lips. "You helped me when I was an intern," he said. "You taught me how to organize files. You brought me coffee when I worked late. You were kind to me when everyone else ignored me." The courtroom went silent. Dawn looked at me, stunned. Dave's face drained of color. "My name is Judge David Morales," the judge continued. "Do you remember me?" And suddenly, I did. Beneath the gray hair and the stern expression was the shy young man who'd once worked in my office, the one I'd defended when senior lawyers mocked him, the one I'd told to believe in himself. "David," I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. "Of course I remember you." He smiled, and for a moment he was that uncertain intern again. "I never forgot your kindness, Mrs. Maeve," he said gently. "You told me I'd be a great judge one day, back when I didn't believe it myself." Dave and his lawyer exchanged panicked glances. They knew. The case was lost. "Your Honor?" Dave's lawyer stammered. "Surely this constitutes a conflict of interest." "There's no conflict," Judge Morales said firmly. "There is only justice. And after reviewing all the evidence, it's clear that Mr. Dave Foster has been the only manipulator in this story." The verdict was decisive. Dave lost all rights to the baby. He was forbidden from approaching Dawn or me and ordered to pay legal costs and emotional damages. When we stepped outside, Dawn hugged me tightly. just like she had when she was little. "Mom, how is it possible that the judge knew you?" she asked in disbelief. "Life moves in circles, honey," I said, "and kindness always finds its way back when you least expect it." 6 months later, when my granddaughter Serenity was born, I understood that everything had been worth it. Dawn had found herself again, strong, gentle, and loving. One afternoon, as we rocked the baby in the garden, Dawn looked at me. "Mom, have you really forgiven me?" I studied her. This woman who had grown so much, who finally saw what mattered. "I forgive you, Dawn," I said softly. "But more importantly, you've learned to forgive yourself." That night, as I sipped tea from my old chipped mug, I thought about my husband and his letter. I had used the power he left me exactly as he'd hoped, not to hurt, but to protect, to teach. Dawn had learned that love isn't control, it's respect, and I had learned that it's never too late to stand up for your dignity. Looking out at the garden where Serenity played, I smiled. Some battles are worth fighting, and some victories are sweeter because they take time to arrive. In the end, I hadn't needed to yell to be heard. I had only needed to remember who I was and defend that truth with quiet strength.